Hello and welcome to the Southside United Methodist Church. Whether you live close by us here in Jacksonville, Florida, or if you live far away, we want you to know that you're welcome. My name is Philip Short. I am the senior pastor here at the Southside United Methodist Church. I have a message for you today. It's entitled, A Generous Assignment. Walk with me through this. A number of years ago, my wife and I lived in Central Florida. We were a ways away from the beach, and both being beach lovers, every now and then we would decide to drive on over to the coast and stay in a little motel. My wife had a job working at a school, and every now and then on Friday would feature canceled classes. So we would go over on a Thursday night, spend all day Friday and much of Saturday, and then drive back to be ready for church on Sunday. One evening, we were enjoying a quiet conversation at home, and my wife said, "Hey, why don't we go to that little motel at the beach where we always stay? I don't have classes on Friday, and we could spend some good quality time there." It sounded great to me. I was in the middle of a task, so I asked my wife to make the reservations for me. She picked up the phone and called the motel where we had these little mini vacations several times in the past. And she inquired about a room for the nights that we would have been traveling there. And the man rather abruptly said, "I'm sorry, I don't have any room. We're filled. We're at capacity." And the conversation quickly wrapped up. And my wife looked at me kind of funny, and she said, something wasn't right about that conversation. She said, I think the man was listening to my accent and was actually discriminating against me. You need to know my wife is Hispanic, Latina, from Nicaragua, from Central America. Her first language is Spanish, and she still has that Spanish accent and will for the rest of her life. It's actually very beautiful to listen to. Here she was telling me that this motel operator heard her accent, though, and assumed that she was a less than savory character and tried to tell her that there was no room in the inn. I remember listening to my wife talk about that and saying, "Oh, no, honey, that wouldn't have been the case." And she said, "Think about it. During this time of year, the motels are never full. We're way out of tourist season." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I hear you, but there's got to be some kind of an explanation other than that. All that kind of bigotry, all that kind of hatred, that's not around like it used to be. That's become rare, and it's been rare for a long, long time. And I'd even like to think that it's over." And my wife said, "If that's the way you think, well, then I tell you what, you pick up the phone, you call them, you find out if you can make a reservation." So I took her up on the challenge. I walked up to the phone and pushed redial. And sure enough, the motel operator was on the line, but with me this time. And I inquired to find out if there were rooms available. And he said, "Sure, Mr. Short. Would you like ocean view or would you like ocean front?" I was taken right in. My wife's suspicions were obviously accurate. And I had to eat my words, and they didn't taste too good. The very person who was trying to deny entrance and service to my wife was like me, of Anglo-American extraction. And so, yes, I did. I ate my words. And I had to come to grips with the fact that racism and discrimination and prejudice were much more a part of the scene, much more a part of the mix than I was willing to acknowledge. I was out of town recently, up in the mountains, kind of away from mass media, away from internet and things like that. It took me coming down from the mountains to learn of George Floyd. a man who does seem friendly enough. And as soon as I could get to media sources, as soon as I could sit down with the internet, I watched the videos that the country had already had a head start in watching, as far as I knew. And I found myself sickened significantly when, while already under arrest, he was pinned down and deprived of taking deep breaths to the point that he died under police arrest. And I hurt for him, and I hurt for his family, and I hurt for his community, and I hurt for our country. And I too have been wrestling since then, nonstop, eager to be in the nation's conversation. It has my attention in ways that it never has before. I believe that people who practice the most abject denial are on the dance floor now, saying, "You've got my attention. Let's talk." And even though the conversation might be difficult for me, and even though it might be uncomfortable for me, it needs to be had. It needs to be spoken. It needs to be heard. It needs to be digested. One of the things that's come out of this entire conversation is something else that pertains to me. It makes me feel uncomfortable. That makes me feel like I'm under a microscope or under a magnifying glass in a place I really don't want to be. And I'm going to ask the congregation to walk with me through it, because if I'm uncomfortable with it, there's probably a chance that you're uncomfortable with it as well. And that's the whole notion of white privilege. That's something that's been bandied about for a while, but is certainly front and center in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. I'm going to be honest with you, I heard the expression white privilege a number of times and really didn't pay it any attention at all, didn't pay it any heed. When I finally got curious enough to read about it, I realize now that I had a very faulty understanding of it. I thought it was saying that because I was white, everything had been given to me on a silver platter. Every promotion I ever got, every good grade I ever got happened simply because I was white. That I never had to try hard for anything. I never had to study. I never had to work. Never had to exert any kind of effort to succeed. And because I had that faulty understanding, I was very dismissive of it. Truth be told, it took going to one of the bishop's seminars about white privilege before I gave it the really fair, judicious understanding that, hey, because of my whiteness, there are certain doors that are open for me, certain pathways that are made straight for me. I didn't know if I should feel good about that or bad about that. I didn't know if I should feel guilty or burdened or what. I really didn't know which direction to go with it. But sure enough, I was challenged to take a really deep inventory, and my mind began to slowly open to the whole idea that I was given some advantages that others could not take for granted. And so I began that entire task. To this day, I still ask myself, what am I supposed to do with my advantage? Well, the good news is that Jesus himself gives us some great teaching to talk about what to do with our advantage, what to do with our privilege, what to do with, shall I say, blessing, the favor and favoritism that sometimes comes to us, even for such reasons as skin color. And I was very interested in the words that he spoke to us in the Gospel according to Matthew, the 25th chapter, verses 31 to 46. Let me read these words to you and listen to them again for the first time. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, He will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or in need of clothes to clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and go and visit you?" And the king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." And they will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you?" And he will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." And then they will go to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. What we hear is the story of the separation of the sheep and the goats. And it's an interesting thing. Sheep and goats have something in common. They have privilege. They have resources. They have valuable things. They have things in plenty to the point that they can give it away. They can share it. They can impart it to others. But one group acts responsibly with that. One group takes its privilege and is lovingly responsible with it. And yet another group takes its privilege and keeps it to itself. Let's talk about that. Jesus said, "I was hungry." You hear that? It's as if Jesus himself, present in hunger, or at least amongst hungry people. And the advantages given me to life, I've never been hungry. Oh, there was a day early on when my parents grew a big garden to kind of help supplement the supply at the dinner table when we were little children. But I've never gone without food. When I have gone without food, it was by choice. I have always had an availability to not just food, but nutritious food and tasty food. I have been privileged. I'm glad I have been. What hunger I've known has only lasted for a day at a time or something like that. And even then, I'm going to admit this weakness. I don't like being hungry. My guess is you don't either. No, I've been quite the opposite of hungry, if anything. I've known tremendous seasons in life where I've been overfed. But what about the ones that are hungry? What about the ones who don't know of that leisure of always knowing food is within reach and an abundant amount of food? Nutritious food, good food is within reach. The sheep say, I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. Okay, I can reach into my abundance. I can reach into my cupboard, my overflowing refrigerator, and my overstuffed freezer, and I can take that and give it away. I'm not going to miss it. I can give it to someone without and make a tremendous difference in their existence. When privilege, when advantage, even in abundance, is shared, is imparted to others. Jesus said, I was thirsty. I've always been close to clean drinking water. I've always been close to a variety of beverages to slake thirst. The times of my life when I've been thirsty have usually been because I was either working really hard at manual labor, or maybe I was playing some sports and became dehydrated, but I could always go anything from a drinking fountain to a soda fountain and replenish the slake of my thirst and be filled. I've always had an abundance of it. I've never known what it was like to go without it. But since I have an abundance of it, the sheep see a responsibility of not keeping it to themselves, not keeping their advantages to themselves. One of my close friends, Bobby Gale, whom the people from Southside have met, has a wonderful ministry by which he digs water wells in sub-Saharan Africa. And the whole idea of a fresh cup of even water, of even safe to drink H2O can't be assumed. As a matter of fact, waterborne disease is the norm. I've never had to know that. I've never had to consider that. My life experience has been so guarded, so protected, that there was just nothing to pay attention to in that. Ask people from my experience, and they're like, oh, that really exists? The sheep says, I'm going to do something about that. And the goat says, no big deal. My needs are getting met. So I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. Reaching from your abundance, reaching from your advantage, reaching from your opportunity, reaching from your wealth, and passing it on to others. I was a stranger, Jesus says. And yes, I have my moments of social discomfort from time to time, walking into a room of people that I don't know well. I sometimes get self-conscious and things like that. But because of advantages given to me, because of privileges that I've inherited, I am generally on my home court. And when I walk into an institution, to a place of business, to you name it, I usually feel like I have a sense of belonging there. People tend to look at me and say, he looks like he fits in. I have, like I've said, that sense of belonging, of ownership of places. But wait a minute, there's people who don't have the advantages that I do. And it runs along lines of race, lines of culture. It runs along any number of lines that, again, my life experience has never, ever challenged me to consider very much. And to be the outsider becomes the norm to so many. And what we do when we turn the blind eye to the stranger is we practice the opposite of hospitality and instead offer estrangement, rejection. And the message is, you don't belong here. Stay away. And Jesus said, I was a stranger, and you invited me in. You hear that? If we're sheep, if we're going to take our advantage and be generous with it, look what we do. We invite. Well, the word invite means to put life into something. Invite them into the life of the party, the life of the conversation, the light of life. Invite in, not leave outside, not leave beyond the boundaries, but invite in. That's a beautiful thing. And again, the sheep, the privileged sheep, have this beautiful obligation to impart that invitation, and the goat stays blinded to it. Jesus said, I needed clothes. I'm not much of a fashion plate. My wife reminds me of that often. But I do have an abundance of clothes. I have a closet, an entire closet. It's nothing huge, but I have a closet and a couple of dressers filled with enough clothes I could go weeks without having to do laundry. I am well clothed. Oh, you might not want to wait in line for my clothing options, but I have an abundance. And there are people who don't have that. And there's doors that close to life because or doors that close to opportunity even because they don't have that access. They don't have that abundance. Instead, they're unclothed. Well, I know what I can do. Jesus tells us, I needed clothes, and you clothed me. By the way, in Jesus' day, to put a cloak on someone's shoulders, to put an article of clothing on them, means that you're giving them blessing. You're giving them favor. I have favor to give away. So if I'm going to be a sheep, I'm going to take that favor and I'm going to share it. But if I'm going to be a goat, I'm going to take that favor and hoard it and isolate it and encapsulate it and keep it just to myself. And where the self reigns, selfishness is never far away. Jesus says, I was sick. I don't like feeling sick either. I don't like having a cold. I don't like having a stomach ache. I don't like any of those kind of aches or pains. I would much prefer to stay well, to stay healthy. And when I am well, when I am healthy, man, I enjoy a quality of life. I can leap and bound. I can interact. I can go places. I can do things. I can accomplish and still have energy left over. But wait, not everyone can. If I have health, I have advantage. I have privilege. Again, I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I'm not going to go out there and try and get sick so that I can relate to those who lack health. But wait a minute, when I do have wealth, I can go places that unhealthy people can't go. And if I'm a sheep in the fold of Jesus Christ, that means I can go places for those who do not have health. Those who lack health are often left alone, uncontacted, isolated. And I could use the privilege and the advantage of my health to walk into their circle of existence, small and constrained though it is, and I can bring fellowship, and I can bring hope, and I can bring encouragement. Again, sheep are going to take that advantage and share it. But the goat is going to be blind to that need. Jesus noted that the sheep do it this way when they're following Jesus right and properly. I was sick and you looked after me. I can help be part of their solution instead of a contribution to their problems. And as if that isn't enough, Jesus went on to say, I was in prison. You know what? If you're in prison, you're obviously disadvantaged. You're obviously in a place where your privileges have been taken away. I've never been in prison before. Well, the times I have been, it was to visit people. When I'm out of prison, I'm free. I can go anywhere I want to. I can go without the restraints of walls or bars or corrections officers or even parole officers telling me where I can and can't go, when I can and can't go there. I can go anywhere. And to the incarcerated, I could very easily think to myself, hey, they've done something wrong. They're getting what they deserve. Let them stay in their isolation. Jesus said of those who were in prison, I was in prison. And you came to visit me. Wow, you mean you took your freedom, your wallless, barless, bound existence and gave it away long enough to step into the world of the imprisoned? Jesus said, yes, I was in prison and you came to visit me. Again, the sheep says, I'll step into that world to bring fellowship, to bring friendship, to bring words of hope and encouragement, to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ. The goat says, you mean you were in prison in the first place? Leave it be. Sheep, goats. Jesus comes to divide them. And the sheep, this one's easy to figure out. They're the good guys. The goats, they're the selfish ones. That makes them the bad guys. And I think part of our recovery, part of our repentance is to realize, hey, I've got a lot of goat in me. I want to be a sheep. And the best way to do that is to follow after Jesus Christ, the good shepherd. Conversations that our country is having right now is inviting us to look at the whole idea of being a goat. What remnant of goatness is in me? What can I do with my advantages? What can I do with the favors that have come easily to me in life? The resources, the riches, the possibilities, the opportunities, when others are going to have them deprived almost out of the starting gates. I grew up in a pretty small town in Central Florida. We used to always complain about it because there was nothing to do there. The town had 2 movie theaters that we really thought that made us something important. But about the best thing you could do on a Friday or a Saturday night was go to the movies. The guy who owned it was the same guy who owned both theaters, and my goodness gracious, my father was his pastor, and one of the ways he said, I love you, was to give a pass to the movie theaters. A pass. See movies. And everyone in the family was allowed to use it too. I didn't have to pay. I could go free of charge. I could take up to 3 other people with me. I got a free pass. I got free passes. I took those and shared them with other people. Someone was giving me access. I took that access and gave it away. Shared it. Covered myself, but covered others as well. I feel like that's what Jesus is asking us to do with all of his blessings, with all of his favors. Jesus said, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. With all of our access as children of God, our privilege as children of God, our privileges that come to us through color of skin and other opportunities, they're to be shared to the point that injustices become just. One of the ways that the Southside United Methodist Church makes this sharing possible is through the ministry of Kairos. Kairos is a prison ministry. And in retreat setting, twice a year, people from this church, after receiving special training, goes to the state prisons, there to fellowship with inmates, there to fellowship with offenders, there to bring the hope and the beauty and the gospel message of Jesus Christ. There, bonds are made, friendships are made, and the love of Christ is communicated, and not only behind bars and in the prison, because all those prisoners have family. They have parents, they have husbands, they have wives, they have sons, they have daughters, and they too are experiencing a lack of privilege and a lack of opportunity with a loved one being incarcerated. So while the Kairos ministry is wonderfully effective of reaching out to those inside the penal institutions, get this, Kairos ministry outside is dedicated to ministering to those who have loved ones in prison, and they too get to have events. They too get to have weekends. They too get to have retreats where the generous love of Jesus Christ, the generous love and provision of His church are shared. And while these might happen in retreat settings, oh, how I long to see the day where these are shared constantly, in season, out of season, to the point that God's kingdom comes and His will is done on earth as it is in heaven. Brothers and sisters, walk away with this. Since I have privileges of a child of God, since I have privileges due to the color of my skin, since I have privileges, advantages, opportunities, why don't I go forth and share those privileges with others? Go out and do that. May the Holy Spirit anoint you in that task. To the glory of God the Father. Amen.